one, I'd like to kind of kick this off with a couple things real quick before we do the roll call. It's just that it is a joint committee, and we're going to be talking about things that traditionally are only talked about in one committee or the other. And so when it comes time for voting on those things, you know, we're doing this for expediency purposes because, as you know, we have a lot of things to do in finance and we have limited staff these days. And so we thought it would be a good idea if we could go ahead and have a joint meeting. But still, I think that, you know, we need to maintain, you know, our voting record with regards to the things we're actually remanded to the people responsible for those items. So the purchasing policy should be really just voted on by the people who are in the audit committee because that was their charter. And then the budget is actually the responsibilities for the finance committee, not the audit committee, because we're not auditing the numbers. And so at the time of voting, if it's not in your remit, we would appreciate it if you would recluse yourself from voting it for those items, if you would please, and work with us on that.
Bill, this is Rose. I have a question. You said that you're segregating, you know, the topics according to committee members or committees.
Just for the voting.
Okay, well, for the purchasing policy, there was some indication that the finance committee entered into this discussion as well.
That was written on an earlier release by accident.
That was an error on my part.
Oh, okay. So they did not.
So
they're not part of it.
they weren't asked to look into it. It was only in July and August that the audit committee and myself were asked to do something about it. And the finance committee was never part of this.
Okay, thank you.
So I would like to now have a roll call for the finance committee.
Very good.
Well, why don't we start all the roll calls?
Yeah, I'll do the finance committee roll call.
Okay.
Mayor Widmer,
Here?
Councilmember Dobby,
Here?
Greg Conlon,
Here.
Jeff Wise, Alan Enderman,
Oh, here.
absent. And for the audit committee, I'll do a roll call as well.
Okay.
Mayor Widmer,
Here?
Councilmember Dobby,
Here?
Hahn,
Here.
Lamb,
Oh, here.
Conlon,
Here?
here,
Let me see.
Massey.
and
Massey.
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 You skipped over me, I'm
I
here.
did, you're here.
By the way, I'd like to apologize to the committee, I didn't, my email, somebody's been trying to steal my domain name, so I've gotten no email for a couple weeks, and I missed the last audit committee meeting, I was in surgery, so I apologize to
Right.
the chair.
So we've had the roll call, and so I guess we open up to public comments, Bill.
Okay, so because I'm on the phone when we do things, we're going to have to go through kind of a little bit more formal procedure, etc. But I have absolutely, my boss said he was going to come in and make a comment, but he's chosen not to at this time. So there's no other people that are interested in discussing these items here in Atlanta.
Okay.
Okay.
We have one member here from the public. Do you make a comment? And what is your name?
Mark Plutinsky.
Mark is televising the meeting.
Okay. Mark, are you going to make a comment?
I recuse myself from making any comments. Thank you, though.
Okay, thank you for recording our session.
So why don't you open the door for a minute, make sure there's no public out there? Any public?
Public comment?
Oh, Jeff Weiss is coming.
All right.
Jeff Weiss is on his way.
Okay, so now we're on the regular agenda, and I did not make either of those meetings because I similarly was out of town, so I cannot vote on the minutes.
So yes, I just provided the minutes to the committee today. I apologize for not getting them to you earlier.
Well, let's make sure I have them. Which one are we talking about? Finance or?
Well, if you want to do finance committee first, that was January 12th. We approved the minutes and I did make the adjustment to the date on the minutes as discussed. I recorded the comments that we discussed about street funding. We also briefly discussed pension side funds and I recorded those comments. There was an agenda item related to the second tier of retirement benefits. The city manager stated that this would be better discussed in labor negotiations, and the committee agreed. briefly discuss the status of the inventory project, which the committee asked that we bring the final disposition to the city council. And so that's recorded in the minutes, and we set the next time. So that was the finance committee minutes.
Can I, just before you go on to the next, item number 4, I suggested we look at the fees of other cities for road impact fees. I'm wondering if anything has been done on that item.
We have not done a comparison for other fees, but as part of the budget, we are looking at the revenues right now and working on that.
All right.
Right, and also, Jim, if I could add, when Deborah and I had a quick discussion, I informed her really, because there wasn't an audit trail left from Louise, but that, we were sweeping up these old permit fees and things like that,
Yeah.
that we actually had, had being run out of the building department. And I asked her if she could touch base with Mike and see, is there anything outstanding, and then we can proceduralize this so it's done regularly. And she's going to look into that, but I'm sure she has not had time because we just met last week.
Okay, and the other item is item number 7, that we discussed the inventory project. I haven't yet seen an action plan for final disposition of assets.
Correct, we're developing that.
Okay.
I've met with the police department, and Public
Okay.
Works is putting together their list of what they want to
All right, I
surplus.
just want to be sure those items aren't forgotten, so we can continue them. Okay, so
Okay,
I would like to, I will make a motion that we approve the minutes as written.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And
Okay.
I abstain.
Yeah, you abstained. All right,
and then the audit committee minutes from January 10th. We discussed property tax, and Councilmember Dobby had received some correspondence from the Deputy Controller of San Mateo County, and I've called the Deputy Controller to ask him to have time to discuss it, and he said yes, but can I do it later because they're in the middle of the redevelopment agency auditing for successor agencies. So I reviewed the memo, and I will bring that back at the next
Say
meeting.
that again, ma'am.
The controller asked that I meet with him at a later date because they're in the
The
middle.
controller what?
The San Mateo County controller that wrote to,
did he give you a date?
no, I haven't set a date.
I would ask him to give you a date.
Can I make a suggestion, since we've just received these audit committee meetings, may I suggest that we table this and give the members time to review this before we make a motion to accept it or reject it or clarify it, this is sort of,
That's
I like to review things, so, unless there's something outstanding.
That's fine.
I'm happy to put it on the next meeting.
Yeah.
Okay,
No problem. Okay,
so we need a motion to table the minutes, I think.
Okay, I'd like to make a motion to table the minutes until our next audit committee meeting.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye,
Aye.
All opposed?
All right, and I abstain.
yeah.
Thank you.
okay. All right. Now on the agenda, the next item we have is review of the draft purchasing policy. Would you like to have that item?
Well, wait a
next?
minute, on these minutes, even though we proposed them, but are you taking action on this irrevocable trust request that the, I guess we just bring it, has the actuarial study been completed?
No, it's not complete yet. That was scheduled to come back in April, and so that's
The
not
item?
completed yet. Mhm.
Okay, all right. All right, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Mayor, would you like to do purchasing policy next?
Bill?
Bill, are you there?
I'm sorry, I got interrupted for a second,
Oh.
so I apologize.
That's all right. Would you like to do the item number 4, draft purchasing policy next?
Yeah, that'd be terrific. As you know, this is a long history. I'll just kind of give an update, and then I'll hand over to Deborah, because Deborah's done a lot of the work, if not all the work on this. In 2010, July, the council was asked to look at a new purchasing policy and actually look at the addition of a separate section, 3.17. And it was sent back down to the audit committee, and, you know, we did a cursory review with all of us as a group, and we ended up writing it and rewriting it and rewriting it and rewriting it a number of times, and with Deborah's coming on board, you know, it fell down to the city manager and the city attorney, in conversations with several council members, felt it might be good to have a fresh pair of eyes, maybe bring what other cities are doing, and so Deborah took it upon herself to write up something that, you know, with her short knowledge of what we're doing and what other people are doing, take another look at getting something that we could possibly use, you know, starting moving forward. And so this is the first draft, and Deborah, just so you know, Deborah and I have had a conversation on it. There's some wordsmithing that I've spoken with Teresa about, and she and Bill Connors and Deborah have all agreed to go over some of those things, and we can make sure that we all understand one another. So there's going to be some wording changes. And so if you looked at it, there may be some words that we're going to address, or maybe not. And then there is also the limits that Deborah and I and Teresa had a quick conversation on, that we can discuss here. And so what we're looking for out of this meeting really is kind of two things from the audit committee. What's your input on the limits? We can all discuss those things. And then also, if you want to understand something about the words and put some input in on it, that of course is very, very welcome. And then you can decide to either let it go with the understanding there's going to be pending audits before it goes to the council, or have another meeting in April before it goes to the council, but it will go to the council in April. So there'll be a decision at the end of the conversation as to how this committee would like to proceed, but no matter which way it goes, comments on all of it are specifically welcome.
Okay,
Deborah, would you like to add anything?
Go ahead.
Okay, I'd like to begin by saying that, you know, I'd like to really thank Deborah for your summary of this procedure. I think that the way it was drafted really helped us understand where we're coming from and where we're going, or what the suggestions are. I really appreciate the clarity of this. Number one, given that, I do have some questions, and I'm sure other people will jump in, and I don't want to just dominate all the questioning. You know, I'd like an understand. I think the key to this, based on our previous meetings, were the proposed limits. You know, as an audit committee, as I recall, during the last year meeting, we had issues with the proposed limits, and the audit committee went round and around. And so I'd like an understanding of how these limits were arrived at. In the last meeting, my understanding was that, I think John Danielson was there, and there was some indication that the limits were industry norms in this area. And I'd like to find out if that's, you know, what was said, or that's true, or are we basing these limits on some industry norm, or what?
Well, I don't want to answer for Deborah, but Rose, what I'd like to add to that is that your recollection is right. There were two things on the previous audit committee. One was the limits, because they were Duncan was asking for some very expanded limits, and I guess when it first came up, I think at the time it was Councilmember McKeithen had some issues with that. And then also in our reading of it, the fact that things could be delegated down very, very low, and that there was these informal bids, and that the same person who received, you know, could authorize payment, that there was a potential, not that we weren't making any claims, but there was a potential where there could be fraud. And so there was wording changes as well as, or proposed wording changes, as well as limit changes. And your recollection that John didn't have a problem with the limits is how I recollect it as well.
You mean John did not have a problem with the proposed limits?
He did not have a problem with where we came up with.
Right, okay.
Right, because, and what Deborah did, she showed, I took a quick gander at them and said some of them probably is right, we should raise, and some of them probably shouldn't be raised because they seem to be doing okay, and I'm not really sure that there's a large number of things that were really impacting the city, but Deborah wanted to, give her input, and so.
And
So sorry for butting in.
to my recollection, Bill, too, that you were heavily involved with redrafting this procedure, and my understanding also, or my recollection was that what you had come up with did not totally coincide with what is being proposed now.
That's correct, and that's why, there's some wording changes I'd like to propose, I proposed to the city manager.
If I could go through and just let you know the process I used, because I do come at a disadvantage of not being here through all the discussion.
Yep.
And so is what I did when
Probably
I started with this process, I had a copy of what was told to me to be the most recent red line of what Bill and the previous city attorney had worked on. And so I had that to start with, and then I also was asked by the city manager to come up with a general law purchasing policy that I felt was very up-to-date and from a progressive, well-run city. And so I did find one, the city of Laguna Hills in Southern California. I highly respect, they've had the same city manager since they were incorporated, the same director of administrative services, so they've been able to really keep up with all the best practices. So I took theirs, and I took our ordinance that was redlined, and I felt that our current ordinance was not easy to follow, and it wasn't in a very good order for me to follow. So I thought their structure was much more simplistic and easier to understand. So I used that as the base, but I took much of the language that the city attorney and I felt was appropriate to incorporate into that one, and I put it in. And the limits did come from towns like the city of Laguna Hills who have recently updated their ordinance. Theirs was updated in 2011. And so when you say what is the industry standard for limits for purchasing policies, it's truly a policy decision for the organization of what limits feel good to that organization. And it sounds like you've had several of those conversations already, so you may not have to rehash them again, you just have to inform me about them. Is what I wanted to do is I wanted to present you with what the industry's best practices are for people that are putting forth new ordinances. So new cities, new towns that are being incorporated recently, people that have updated their policies are putting a city manager signature authority of about 50,000 in there just due to the magnitude of what purchases are. I understand that might not be right for this town, and so we can discuss that. Also, one of the proposals last time had to do with going to the state controller's office and filing an election for the public works projects to be kind of in a separate category. So the state code allows you to set certain limits under the, what is it called, the cost accounting process. The government, what is it called here, under public works projects? Not GAP, no, it has, under the California Public Contracts Code, there is the ability to go forward and set your own limits if you file with the state controller's office, and that's what was proposed last time when the ordinance came to the council, and so we're doing that as well, but we're including it in with this ordinance. And so that's why under your summary it says public works contracts, and it has a little bit different limits. The state controller's office just recently lifted the limits, I think from 125,000 to 175,000 for those types, but our public works director wanted those to be lower, and he actually wanted me to recommend them being consistent with the non-public works signing authority. So I can kind of talk you through a little bit of the differences in that, just so you're educated about the way, cities have kind of 3 different categories of purchasing.
Yeah, that was one of my questions,
Yeah.
if you could.
I would be happy to. But so that's where I came from. I just wanted you to know, the city attorney has reviewed this. He feels that everything that's in this package is legal. Although, as the mayor said, we are gonna sit down with him and go over some, possible tweaking of the language and maybe adding some things or subtracting
Right,
some
and
things.
one of the things that I'd like to point out, and one of the reasons why I've offered lower numbers is first off, Laguna Hills is 30,000 people versus 8. As you pointed out, Bruce Channing, the city manager's been there for quite some time.
Yes.
Everybody in our organization is interim. And so we may start out at a limit and then change it over time. But it's good for us to understand what other cities are doing. Their budget is substantially larger than ours, and so, we really have less discretionary cash. And so, you don't wanna, for me, I didn't think it was appropriate for us to be able to give it away all at one shot.
So Bill, it almost sounds like you're arguing to lower these limits, which is how I thought we started this process.
Well, what I'm arguing for is actually the numbers that are on what is supposed to be handed out that showed I had different limits.
The
The
mayor's
numbers that I
recommended.
had there were.
Everybody has that.
So I think she's going to show. I'm not arguing for the limits that are in what was sent out. I'm arguing. I'm saying I can support. If you go to page 2 of the staff report, I would like to discuss, with the interim city manager and with Deborah, the potential, and I appreciate that she at least, she wanted to make sure everybody understood what I was recommending, and I appreciate that, allowing that insight.
Okay.
So you see a lot of the numbers that I've left are exactly the same. However, I do think that and I think we all can agree, hopefully, over time, that, street work is actually a little bit more expensive, and if you're gonna be doing that, it's very little that it's under $15,000. But anyway, if Deborah has given you that mayor's recommended limits, which is after her proposed limits compared to the current limits, Rose, mine are more in line with the proposed limits.
Are you looking at that?
Bill, this is Jim.
You have the mayor's.
Yeah, I wanna say I support
Well, I
what
have
you said
proposed and
about
current, I
interim
don't-
city
What's the mayor's?
staff, and also I support the lower limits, given some of our history here that we've seen over some number of years, which this audit committee had to unravel, so.
Right, but I think that there
I'm
needs to
for
be
low-
some
I'm for lower
we are
limits and
trying
lower
to
control.
attract some new people, and we don't want them to come in here thinking that their hands are gonna be tied, but we've gotta learn to trust them, and they've gotta learn to trust us.
Right.
That's my point.
Well, I think at
And
this
so,
point, we
a
need
year
to
from now,
have the lower
now, yeah,
situation.
I think we could look at this every year and decide whether or not to change the limits. But at
See
this
how
point
it
in
goes.
time, there were certain things that I felt, I recommended to Teresa, and she spoke with Deborah, and they at least felt it was appropriate to at least show the numbers, and so, so you now know the reason why I put my numbers in, having, the history of what's happened in the past, and now, unless anybody has a question for me specifically, I'll shut up and let Deborah and y'all talk about it.
Okay.
If somebody wants to ask me a specific question, I'm more than happy to go over it with you.
Okay,
But,
Bill, I was
really, it's important that Deborah walk you through this, okay?
Okay, yeah, I'd like that to be the next step, is to walk through and define something, but I was just, I just received another piece of paper that shows your recommended limits on it, which I did not have before. And that-
Okay, yeah, hopefully you're happy with these.
Yeah, that kind of clarifies, because I was really,
I've been out here doing something in California kind of crazy, or in Atlanta kind of crazy.
okay.
I haven't been.
Okay, now I get it. Okay, let's move on. I'd like to propose, what I'd like to find out, what I'd like a brief summary of is from Deborah. If you could go through these types, open market procedures, the goods, supplies, the professional contract services, and public work contracts, and then go through each and just sort of summarize what they are, because 2 of them, I just don't see a difference. but maybe it'll be clarified.
So,
when we go through.
I'll be happy to do that. So the major differences in procurement really have to do with, goods, supplies, equipment, material, and non-professional services versus professional services. So we always call out professional services kind of in a different area. And so the first one I'll go over is the procurement of, supplies, equipment, materials, and non-professional. Now, public works contracts is separate really because the state government code states that a public works project is any kind of maintenance project on public facilities or infrastructure that's greater than $5,000, and there's a specific advertising requirements. Not necessarily formal bidding always, they're different limits, but it requires a specific advertising thing. And then within that public contracts code, it allows for agencies to adopt something that's an alternative that the legislative body has agreed to, and so that's what we're proposing to do, and that's why public works contracts are pulled out a little separately, but normally they could also fall under the first category of supplies and equipment and such. So there's, the definition of goods and supplies and materials and non-professional services is pretty standard. It's pretty much anything that's non-professional services. And so I put in there 3 different categories. One is up to a certain limit, the mayor is suggesting up to $5,000. The city is able to use open market procedures where they get 3 informal quotes to make their decision. And then a purchase order is required that's authorized by, the purchase order is authorized by the finance director and the purchasing officer, which is the city manager. So the city manager and the finance director are both signing off on all of these
So
types
an
of
informal
purchases.
quote would be just somebody phoning somebody else saying, give us a price to do this.
Yes.
Well, Rose, one of my edits is questioning whether or not we should do the informal quotes, because that was one of the things that we took out of the original one. However, I think it's important that the city manager and Deborah would like to discuss it more and make sure that we fully understand what they think and what so that word informal may change, it may not. That was one of the issues we had, but we have not had time to sit down and discuss that and understand each other's thought process, because this was put together, I won't say it's rushed, but Deborah has done a terrific job in getting a lot of things done for us, and this is one thing that had kind of slept through the crack for a while, and then when we said, hey, we really want to get this going, it's been too long, she put something together fairly quickly, and I got it. I didn't get a chance to review it until I was on an airplane on Sunday.
So an example of an informal situation, or a situation where we would get an informal quote would be,
If we are going to be out there purchasing some supplies or something for the police department, say, we would let vendors, at least 3 vendors know specifically what we want, and they would provide us with a quote.
In writing?
no. that's not
This one could be in writing, but it's not required. The next category is required to be in
But
writing.
on this informal quote,
Mhm.
one of the things we discussed before about this, because it was being abused, was that every informal quote had to be written down. In other words, no matter what it was, every informal quote had to be written
There's gotta
down.
be an audit trail.
With the date, the amount, and the time, and that all of that should be available for an audit.
Well, Jim, and that's right, and that those things are actually recorded in the city clerk's office. However, what we agreed and what we discussed was that they could get informal quotes, in the rewrite that we looked at as a group. We said that they could get informal quotes, but by the time the procurement was made, the formal quotes needed to have been sent in. But they could start the action and move forward and start getting approvals so as to not cause unnecessary delays. But by the time we bought something, a formal bid actually needed to be in writing.
But
So
we-
they could say, yeah, I can get you one, but I can't get you one till Monday.
But we
I
still,
would say, yeah, okay, let's go forward.
Well,
but-
let me try.
but Bill, we still needed to document each informal quote. because what was happening was, based on my suspicions, that we had informal quotes and then a decision was made and that was documented, but we were not seeing the competitive bids.
Jim, I'm in 100% agreement with you,
Okay.
and that's why in the rewrite that I did, I took out all informal quotes.
So can I just go through the
So
three different
we can
categories?
decide now that we feel strongly that there shouldn't be any informal quotes. That's what this meeting's about.
So I would like to first go through the three categories so we can all make sure we're clear on what is a formal bid, an informal bid, and an open market. So there's three different categories, and they're basically defined by dollar limit, which we can set those limits. And so let's start at the large one, which is a formal procedure. So the formal procedure says anything over, say, $15,000 or $50,000 is qualifies under the formal procedure, and that's where you do have to do a formal notice inviting bids in accordance with the government code. You publish the notice, you review your bidders list, if it's appropriate, you have bidders security, and you go through the formal process of a formal bid opening, and the council is presented with those, and the council awards the contract. So that's the formal procedure for a certain dollar amount.
And the documentation on the formal proposal is what, a letter or a?
Oh, the documentation is in writing, a sealed bid usually is sent to the city clerk's office. It's a public record. And usually the specs and bids that go out with the solicitation are also very formal documents, in a lot of cases approved by city council.
And you need to add here, on the mayor's recommended limits, you also need to add greater than 50,000.
I will clean that up.
And it's important, I think, Greg, for example, with your background, what we want to do is make sure that we can pass an audit to be able to prove to the taxpayers that we're spending their money properly. And so, your inputs, are right on, and that's where we want your insight on that, especially with your background, because, that's what the council is charged with. And if we're gonna approve this procedure, we need to be charged with being able to tell the taxpayers we're doing the right thing for them. And a lot of the laws in general law cities are passed by, and influenced by different organizations that give autonomy to people who aren't necessarily paying the taxes in the jurisdiction where the money's being spent. So we need to make sure that we feel that, we as a committee and we as the council can make sure that we can pass that audit. So
that's the formal procedure. Then there is an informal procedure, which still requires that the city put forth a certain solicitation. Either the proposals are written, or they're delivered by telephone or email to prospective vendors. And then there have to be at least 3 informal written proposals or bids to be received before the decision can be made. So this one doesn't require the formal notice process, but it does require a fairly formal proposal or specs being put out there and receive something back in writing. And that thing that's in writing is saved on file. It's retained by the city clerk's office for up to 2 years. And then the purchasing officer, which is the city manager or his designee, department head designee, would make the final decision on the lowest qualified vendor, and that would not be required to have council approval. So the dollar limits that are set there allow for staff to go through and make decisions based on the practices that are set up without having to require council approval, as long as it's within the budget.
But when you say, Deborah, the formal proposals, that it will be city manager approval, what exactly does that mean?
For the informal process that I just told you?
It's also for the open market, but informal, just tell me.
That means that, say, a department director would determine that they needed some kind of materials or supplies, and they would go out and they would get the quotes and the bids. They would request a purchase order from finance. Finance would sign off on it if there was money available, and then they would forward it to the city manager, and the city manager would say, yes, you follow the procedures, and there's money available, and
He'd have to sign
we have the
it, sign on
authority.
the line.
Yeah, the thing here that I'm puzzled about, one of the frustrations we've had, and Bill has been aware of this, is that in the past, just before, when we get the council packets, we have all these warrants, and we're sort of asked to approve them. But by that time, all the money's been spent. And therefore, what we've always decided is, and I mean, if you asked our city managers, present city manager accepted, what was this check for? Most of the time, they had no idea. And this time, I want to be sure that the finance director signs off on all invoices before they go out.
Well, either that or what we do is, as you know, we say, we put in our standard terms and conditions, payment will be 45 days thereafter. That gives the council a chance to approve all invoices before the checks are written, which is something that, you and I have discussed earlier, Jim, and I think that we still may want to go do that because we still don't have standard terms and conditions that we've approved as a council.
I mean, the city managers that we've had here, and I will have to say, including John, who I think was a great city manager, tended to think that they did not necessarily have to have approval from the finance director before they went out and did something, and I totally disagree with that, and I've talked to John many times about it. To me, the city manager, the finance director is in charge of the town's money. And therefore, anything that involves money, or the town spending money, he or she should approve it. And here, even just to diverse for a minute, when you say approval requirements, purchasing officer and finance director, I know that when you say that, it means two people. But I would almost add to that 2 signatures. Because, it can be misunderstood. I mean, the English is fine because "and" means two. But I would add there.
Requiring 2 signatures.
Requiring 2 signatures and make it crystal clear.
Right, and that's one of the things that I agree with you, Jim, and we want to make sure that we don't get a chance to delegate things too low in the organization.
Yeah,
There always
absolutely.
should be 2 signatures, and there always needs to be a check against the budget, and I think that